إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه أما بعد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار ثم أما بعد الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام والسنة. After praising Allah and sending the salat and salam upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we continue going over the tremendous letter in which Imam Ibn Qayyim he wrote to one of his brothers, and we continue in our reading of our reading and reflection of the explanation of this tremendous letter by the Fadilatul Sheikh Sulaiman al-Ruhaili, hafidhahullah ta'ala, where we reach his statement and commenting on the opening lines that have in it gentleness and show concern and care for the recipients of the letter. The Sheikh he mentions, he says, وَالْأَصْلُ الرِّفْقِ فِي النَّصِيحَةِ مُطْلَقًا, that the default in advice is gentleness. That gentleness is the default when giving advice across the board. Now, that generally and typically this is the case, is that it's going to be gentle when an individual is giving advice. Illa, except. So there are exceptions. But the default is that it's gentle. That's the default. The exception comes, as the Shaykh he mentions, he says, Illa limuqtadin yaqtadi at-ta'nif. He said, except when there is something that requires and necessitates, or except in the case where there is necessitated harshness. So typically the advice, it comes across, and generally the default is that it is with gentleness. But there are times where you have to be harsh. You have to use harshness. Now, there are times where you have to use harshness. Now, I wanted to stop here because, listen, if you hear one of the ulama, they mention an alim from the ulama, sheikh from the mashayikh, and they mention that the default of advice is gentleness, I don't want you to have the understanding that they believe that harshness is never to be applied when giving advice. It's not what they said. They're speaking about the default, and it's important that we learn to keep things where they are. If an individual is speaking about the default, then he is not commenting on the exception. He's talking about the default right now, right? So a person can't come and say, oh, no, this person has some tamyir with him because he didn't mention, well, what about the mubtadi'? What about the time that you have to be harsh and so on and so forth? Now, he didn't mention that, right? He didn't mention that because he wasn't speaking about that. He was talking about the default. So if a person is speaking about the default, then accept that that is what it is and leave it to the subject in which they are speaking about. In order for you to know their opinion about the exception, or whether there even exists an exception, then that has to be investigated. But to take his speech about the default and then try to apply it and say that, then subsequently they believe that there is never an exception, then this will not be due to justice. So to pull out one phrase and then try to say, oh, this person is mumayyir because look, they're speaking about being gentle when giving advice, but what about, and then they start to mention all of these exceptions. They was talking about the default, not the exception, but you want to highlight the exception as if the exception is the general rule. Okay? And you will find this is the way of the people of ghulu, the people who are extreme, the people who have with them extremism. They focus in on the exception and treat the exception as if it is the general rule. The general rule in giving advice is gentleness. The exception is to be harsh. These individuals flip it. So now the general rule is to be harsh in giving advice. And I guess gentleness is only used in the hizb amongst themselves. That's it. But anyone else is harshness. Harsh, harsh, harsh. But this is not the case. And the proofs and the evidences from the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, they make this abundantly clear that the origin when giving advice is to what? Is to be gentle. That is the origin. Except in those cases that necessitate a moving away from the default to the exception, wherein an individual will use and apply harshness. Inshallah ta'ala, that makes sense? Okay? So the general rule, al-asl, al-rifq, fi al-nasiha mutlaqa, that the default in giving advice is to apply gentleness across the board. Illa, except when there is something which necessitates the utilization of harshness, then we are harsh. نعم. فهناك يحمل كل أمر على ما يقتضيه. So with this, it's important to understand that we approach and that every affair will be taken on its merit and that which it necessitates. So we look at the affair based on what it is. Naam. So in other words, you have to be able to analyze a particular issue or a particular individual and to see what will be most appropriate in this situation. If the situation necessitates a moving away from the default to utilizing harshness because this is what is most beneficial in this particular issue, then you use harshness. So the ulama, they mention that the utilization of gentleness is appropriate in those affairs where gentleness is that which is going to benefit. And the utilization of harshness is appropriate in those affairs where harshness benefits. So you have situations like this. You have situations where if you are gentle, you will not benefit. And you have other situations where if you are harsh, you will not benefit. So it all goes back to the merits of that particular affair, that particular incident, or whoever that particular person is. And based upon an analysis of that individual, specific individual or specific affair, then you will utilize that which is most appropriate. Now, but the origin is that what? Is that you start with gentleness. When you see that gentleness is not going to work, okay, then you go to the exception. Now, that makes sense? So every affair has to be judged upon its merit, has to be looked at upon its merit. Because to put gentleness in the place of shiddah, that's not from hikmah. Why? Because hikmah wad'u shay fi mawdi'i is to put everything in its proper place. So wad'u rifq fi mahil al-shiddah laysa min al-hikmah. So to put rifq in the place, to put gentleness in the place of harshness, this is not from wisdom, and vice versa. To put harshness in the place of gentleness, this is not from wisdom. What is wisdom? Is that you put rifq in the place of rifq, and you put harshness in the place of harshness. You put gentleness in the place of gentleness, and you put harshness in the place of harshness. This is wisdom. So we have to be able to identify and understand the both of them. However, I must stress again, we have to get away from this understanding where we believe that being harsh is the origin. Now, we have to get away from this understanding where we believe being harsh is the origin. And a person will come and say, well, what about the mubtadi'? The Mubtadi', we should be harsh and rough with the innovator, right? If you say, what about the Mubtadi', then we will ask you, what about Fir'aun? Who was more arrogant? Who was more oppressive? Who was more evil? The Mubtadi' or Fir'aun? Keep in mind, before you be quick to answer, the individual of low understanding of knowledge, keep in mind that the Mubtadi' is a Muslim. The Mubtadi' is still Muslim. Whereas Fir'aun was a kafir. Okay? So now I ask you again. You say, what about the Mubtadi'? Then I ask you, what about Fir'aun? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Musa and Harun alayhum salatu wassalam to go to Fir'aun with a gentle statement. To utilize what? To utilize gentleness with Fir'aun. This is how they began with him. Gentleness. Naam. So likewise, what about the Mubtadi'? The origin is gentleness. You only use harshness when gentleness is not appropriate. But the origin is gentleness. You only use harshness when gentleness, you realize, you know, from this particular individual, this specific case is not going to benefit. So then you use what? Harshness. Okay? That makes sense? All right. So I want to get this clear because listen, fighting against the individuals of harshness, then we have to fight against this across the board. And we have to adjust and we have to pivot because there were, all of us at a time, we were harsh. All of us at a time, due to enthusiasm, due to a lack of knowledge and so on and so forth. We all found ourselves at one point of our lives when we were harsh. Now, all of us in one way or another, in one incident or another, in one situation or another. Now, because we come up short and we all make mistakes. But the point is that we have to pivot and we have to be able to adjust and we have to allow ourselves, because this is what it means to be what Sunni Salafi, to what? So that our actions, they are governed by the text. So if we were incorrect, then we were incorrect, and we state that we were incorrect and that was wrong, and that we have to rectify, make tawbah, and adjust. Now we don't double down because of, no, but we adjust. So the origin, again, let me go back and let me reiterate. The default is gentleness when giving advice. So the Shaykh, he mentions, he says, وَإِلَّا فِي الْأَصْلِ الرِّفْقِ. He said, and except for this, then the origin is rifq, meaning except outside of those situations that are the exceptions to the rule that require harshness. Outside of those incidents and those situations, then the origin is to be gentle. ففي الصحيحين, meaning inside of Al-Bukhari and Muslim, أن اليهود, that a group of Jews أتوا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالوا السلام عليك, that a group of Jews, they came to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and they said, death unto you. They said السلام عليك, يعني الموت عليك, meaning that death be upon you. ولكنهم ينطقون الكلمة قريبة من لفظ السلام. نعم. So they said, except that these individuals, they expressed, they articulated, they pronounced the word as-sam to sound just like as-salam. You know, they're playing word games, right? They're playing these semantical games. So they were saying as-samu, which means a death, alayk, and they try to make it sound like they were saying as-salamu. Now, because the two are not that far off in their articulations. Likewise, in the way in which that they are spelt. The only difference is that as-salam has a lam, and as-sam, there's no lam. So they try to play these games, trying to act like they can trick the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he heard them very well. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said unto them, وعليكم, and you too. And you too. So now they both making dua. But we know whose dua is going to be accepted. Okay? فقالت أمنا عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها. So our mother Aisha رضي الله تعالى عنها, because she heard what they said, and that they were trying to be slick and play these games. So she replied unto them, Assalamu alaykum wa la'anakumullah wa ghadiba alaykum. She said, no, may the death be upon you all, and may Allah curse you all, and may Allah be angry with all of you. Now, so she replied, and she escalated it and took it up because of them trying to be so disrespectful to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in her vigor to support the truth and be supportive of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She said these words, and everything she said, Juyaanee, was true. Was true. She didn't say anything that was a lie. Everything she said, and she asked Allah Ta'ala, Juyaanee, to put upon them was true, and they deserved it. So I want you to keep that in mind. Inshallah Ta'ala will come back and mention that again. So our mother Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, سمعتهم يقولون للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم السلام عليكم. So our mother Aisha, she heard them saying to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may death be upon you. ويدعون عليه بالموت, and they were making dua that Allah Ta'ala caused the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to die. Subhanallah wa ya'udhu billah. فقالت, so she said in reply, no, Assalamu alaykum, no, death upon you all. Yani, addu'akum alaykum, may your dua be upon you. Now, may your dua be upon you. But then she went on and she added, وَلَعَنَكُمُ and may Allah Ta'ala curse you all. وَغَضِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ, may Allah Ta'ala be angry with all of you. وَهُمْ يَسْتَحِقُونَ هَذَا. The Shaykh, he mentions, he said, and they deserve that. They are worthy of that. They are worthy of Allah Ta'ala's curse and Allah Ta'ala's anger. They are worthy of that. They are Yahud Maqdub alayhim. Now, they are those whom Allah Ta'ala, He is angry with. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, so the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, مهلا يا عائشة. He said, be easy, O Aisha, be easy. عليك بالرفق. It is upon you to be gentle, right? Meaning that what? Showing her this situation, it doesn't necessitate harshness. This situation does not necessitate harshness, even with their verbal abuse, even with their disrespect, even with their playing games and potentially trying to toy with us and belittle our intelligence as if we're not going to be able to hear the difference between as-samu and as-salamu. Be gentle. It doesn't require any type of harshness. وَإِيَّاكِ وَالْعُنْفِ وَالْفُحْشِ, and beware of being abrasive and foul. Beware of being abrasive and foul in speech. Now, and this is just a general warning, not to say that anything she said was foul in speech, because it wasn't, because they were worthy of that. Now, فقالت, so our mother Aisha, she said, to gain more understanding, أَوَلَمْ تَسْمَعْ مَا قَالُوا, didn't you hear what they said? Thinking that the Prophet ﷺ, perhaps he didn't clearly hear what they said. She said, didn't you hear what they said? So the Prophet ﷺ, in responding to her, while affirming her, yes, I heard what they said, but that's not the point. We're not talking about what they said. Now, so the Prophet ﷺ, he said unto her, أَوَلَمْ تَسْمَعِي مَا قُلْتِ, didn't you hear what I said? I'm not telling you what they said, but didn't you hear about what I said in response to them? رَدَدْتُ عَلَيْهِمْ, I responded unto them. I responded unto them. And that was with his statement, وَعَلَيْكُمْ. Naam, I responded unto them. فَيُسْتَجَابُ لِي فِيهِمْ وَلَا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُمْ فِيَّا. They made dua against me, I made dua against them. And my dua against them is accepted, whereas their dua against me is not accepted. Their dua against me is rejected. So they made dua against me, I made dua against them. Their dua is rejected, my dua is accepted. So didn't you hear what I said? It's enough. I responded. My response was enough. It was an end to the situation. There was no need for an escalation. There was no need to to bring anything above that or beyond that. Now, so in that, there's so many lessons that one can take away from it. But inshallah ta'ala, we'll leave that perhaps to another time. But there are a lot of fruits and a lot of benefits that are contained in that in that exchange. So the Shaykh goes on and he mentions, he says, فَرَدَّ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم شَرَّهُمْ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ غَيْرِ عُنْفٍ. So the Prophet ﷺ, he repelled their evil upon them without being harsh, because a lot of times you can refute someone with a smile, right? You can repel a person's evil in a manner that doesn't necessitate any type of harshness. A lot of times it's like that, man. A lot of times it's like that. وقال لي عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها في هذا المقام العظيم وعليك بالرفق. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Aisha at this time, during this type of situation, the Prophet ﷺ, he said unto her, it is upon you to be gentle. نعم عليك بالرفق. It's upon you to be gentle. Why? Because in this situation, we were able to repel their evil and refute them gently. So with that being the case, there's no need for anything but gentleness. Does that make sense? If gentleness will get the job done, then you're gentle. You're not harsh. The only time you become harsh is when what? Is when gentleness cannot get the job done. And the only way to get the job done is by being harsh. Then you are harsh. But as long as you're able to get the job done in a gentle manner, then you're gentle. You're never harsh. You're not harsh. Does that make sense? Right. Well, for riwayah, and in a narration, the Prophet ﷺ said to our mother Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, إن الله يحب الرفق في الأمر كله. That the Prophet ﷺ said to her in a narration that verily Allah, He loves gentleness in all affairs. Allah loves gentleness in all affairs. The Shaykh goes on to mention, he says, وهذا المنهج الرشيد من توفيق الله تعالى للعبد. He said that being upon this guided methodology, then this is from the success in which Allah has granted a slave. And يوفقه للرفق في بيته, that He gives him the success in being gentle inside of his house. Now I want you to pay attention to this. That being gentle, this is something that is a benefit, is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives to His servants, making them gentle. Now, making their default gentle. And let me tell you something. When the default is gentle, right, this makes the utilization of harshness even more so powerful. You understand? When the default is gentle, a person is known to being gentle. A person is known for being calm. So now, if they raise their voice or become irate, everyone's going to stop and listen now, because now this is outside of character. This is outside their norm. So this must be really serious if it's causing them to raise their voice and to be harsh, because typically they respond in a very calm manner. Okay? So I want you to reflect on that. That when your default is gentleness, this makes the times that you have to be harsh even more effective. Whereas if a person is harsh all the time and their go-to is to be harsh and start yelling from the beginning, their yelling after a while will become ineffective, because now it's just, oh, here he go yelling again. Oh, here she go yelling again. You know, it becomes their norms. It becomes very easy to dismiss them and not really give a lot of thought into actual merit of what they're saying. It's just, here they go again. I don't even want to hear it. What are they yelling about now? What are they going on about with now? Now, so I just want you to reflect on that. And it's very unfortunate, and it hurts the dawah where you have individuals, who this has become known from them, and this is how the people respond to them. Oh, what they going about on now today. Oh, who they refuting now. Because this is what becomes known from them. Benefit? No. Refutation? Yes. All they know from them, and they refute. What benefit, what value is actually gained from them? People are hard pressed to find it. Now, where their reputations? Find it. Whereas those ulama, those students who they are known to give value and benefit to the people, and this is what they are known for, when they stop to refute somebody, you stop and pay attention because it's, oh, subhanAllah, Sheikh's refuting them. Okay, this must be really serious. It's more effective, right? Does that make sense? Inshallah ta'ala, I hope that makes sense. Now, ala kulli hal, to have your default as being gentle, then this is a gift from Allah ta'ala that he bestows upon his slaves, where he gives them the success in making gentleness their default in their house. Now, so amongst in their home. وأن يوفقه للرفق مع إخوانه في السنة, and that يعني في السنة والخير والحق والهدى, and that Allah Ta'ala makes that slave his default as being gentle with his brothers upon the sunnah, meaning his brothers and sisters upon the sunnah and upon good and upon truth and upon guidance. واتباع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and following the model of the Prophet ﷺ, as utilized with those who are following the way of the Prophet ﷺ, لا في بدعة ولا في ضلالة, that not utilizing the gentleness in an inappropriate manner when it comes to bid'ah and when it comes to ad-dalalah. Na'am, because of course, as aforementioned, there's sometimes you got to be harsh. Na'am, so if you can repel the bid'ah in a manner utilizing gentleness, then we repel the bid'ah utilizing gentleness. Now, because that's the first thing we're going to go to. That's the first, if we were to say, that's the first weapon we're going to use. The first weapon that we're going to use is going to be gentleness. When we have seen that gentleness is not going to work in this situation, and that the more appropriate tool, the more appropriate weapon is to bring out the big gun, then we bring out the harshness. Then we bring out the harshness. Now, so when we have to be harsh, we're harsh, and we don't apologize for it, because this is what is appropriate. When we have to be harsh, we're harsh, and we don't apologize, because this is what is appropriate due to the bid'ah and due to the dalalah. Now, but when we could settle it with a 22, then we don't use a bazooka. We keep it with the 22. Why are you going to waste your missile? Just use a bullet. Okay, for lack of a better term, right? Ala kulli hal, it is important and it is a must that as Ahlul Sunnah we understand this and we become keen and very wise and skilled in knowing when to use what, and that we know what the default is and what the exception is upon clarity. Bithnillahi ta'ala. Illa liqa. Astawdi'ukum Allah.